Speaker is Dr. Renuka, and she'll be speaking about measuring rheumatic disease activity based on laboratory parameters. I invite Dr. Renuka to give her talk, and I think Dr. Renuka does not need any introduction for this. Over to Dr. Renuka.
Good afternoon. The first thing when Dr. Chandrasekhar told me that your topic is going to be measuring rheumatic disease activity based on laboratory parameters, I said, what do I talk? Because there are very few markers which are there for discussing as far as activity is concerned. A lot of investigations for diagnosis, but for activity, very few markers, those also, many of which are non-specific, as just right in the morning, Dr. Vishnuvardhan, he has already said in the morning that the ESR, CRP are such non-specific markers, how are they going to be useful? However, when I looked up at the literature, and I was really surprised and zapped by the kind of markers which have come up, which are there in the stage of evaluation as far as the measuring rheumatic disease activity is concerned. A lot of work has been happening in the last decade and particularly in the last few years. It was in 1883, Lord Kelvin, who is a great physicist, he said that if you can measure something, that means you have some knowledge about it. And if you cannot, then your knowledge is very meager. So we look into disease activity as a measure. The clinical measures have well discussed in the morning. Here I would just say that to define per se what is disease activity is we are looking at what is the potentially reversible aspect of the disease is what we call as disease activity. And what is irreversible is actually a disease damage that is there concerning any disease disease for that matter. It forms a critical component of a patient care because if you know what is the status or what is the stage at which the patient is currently, then you can decide whether to go very aggressive on therapy, to modify the therapeutic response, how well is the patient being doing, and all this. So that is the reason it becomes a critical component of a patient care. It correlates with the clinical status, and as far as rheumatological disorders are concerned, it indicates inflammatory activity, the ongoing process of disease, and changes during the course of the disease. It contributes very importantly to major management decisions. So when you say I need a measure, it should be something which should be well validated, objective, feasible, and uniformly interpretable. We just saw in the morning which score to receive, DAS 28, DAS 70, and so on. And then there are some perspectives like from the patient's point of view, it is different, and from the clinician's point of view, it is different. So that is why we need a measure which can be objectively assessed, and that's where lab does play a very major role. The problem with getting a marker of this kind is still a challenge because rheumatological or autoimmune connective tissue disorders are basically multidimensional disorders. They do not just affect one organ, but they have extra-articular manifestations right from the CNS to the cardiovascular system and the renal system very commonly. But we need to find a marker which is just not measurable, it should be comparable, because when you are doing different studies epidemiologically and on clinical research, you need to compare the different populations and how well the patients are being done. Coming to rheumatological disorders, I just said that they are inflammatory disorders. So what is most critical or important is measuring the inflammation. And for this, whenever there is any damage which occurs in the tissue, there are a few markers which come into the play in the circulation. And these are the proteins which are released during the process of inflammation, which are called as inflammatory biomarkers. These are also called as acute phase reactants, but it is much more appropriate to use the term inflammatory biomarkers because they give us an indication of the inflammation. These could be of the positive and negative Positive are the ones which increase with inflammation, and there are a few parameters like albumin, transthyretin, and so on, which decrease with the inflammation. So you have inflammatory biomarkers, they assist in monitoring the disease activity and the treatment response. They have the limitations, they are quite non-specific, but still they have a major role. Let us look at some of the two common parameters which are done in a rheumatological practice. One is the C-reactive protein and the ESR. C-reactive protein is a protein which belongs to the pentraxin group of families, which is synthesized by the hepatocytes due to the stimulation of the interleukin 1 and 6. It acts by activation of the classical pathway of the complement system, because it opsonizes and helps in the complement system and releases the complements. So that is why it becomes a very direct measure of inflammation. CRP is known to show a rapid response to infection and inflammation. It increases within hours of stimuli and returns rapidly to normal following resolution. How do you measure CRP? CRP is usually measured as by multiple methods are there. What is very important is that the way it is done, it can be done by immunoturbidometry or nephelometry, and there are a lot of assays which wherein they do a latex agglutination test and so on, but please do not do an assay of this kind by, sorry, not CRP actually, but still you have some rapid assays which are being done, but it is better to go by a method which is well standardized like a nephelometry or immunoturbidometry, wherein you get an exact quantifiable value and you do not have the problem of Poisson phenomenon and so on. Quantification is precise, and the measurement on the serum can be done even on stored samples after few days if separated and stored immediately. Coming to ESR, which was a very common test, the first test which you do even when you enter into medicine. It is a very important marker of inflammation, but it is a very non-specific marker raised also in many other conditions. However, when you have multiple clinical conditions and you can see the patient, he's having arthritis, he's having other clinical features, then at that time the role of ESR does become important. The problem with ESR is it requires a fresh sample. Yes, there are variations, it has to be done very properly. However, there is a standardized method which is the Westergren's method which has been done. Yes, it can be done by both automated and manual methods, preferably to standardize the protocol. That is why all the methods have been done in such a way, whether done by automated and standardized, modified Westergren's method is still considered as the standard gold protocol method. And even the automated equipments actually are designed in such a way, taking care that the temperature of the equipment is maintained at same conditions and there won't be much variations. We run the QCs so that the ESR values can be better. The only disadvantage here is that it also is raised in multiple conditions like infections, neoplasms and so on. And it has to be done as early as possible. It can't be stored for long. Now why do we do ES? So these are the two major markers which are done. The ESR is one marker. It is an indirect measurement of the presence of the plasma proteins such as fibrinogen. That is why if you see ESR takes a few weeks to increase whenever there is some kind of an inflammation rather than CRP, which can change within a few hours. Coming to the most common clinical condition, rheumatoid arthritis. We all know how to diagnose rheumatoid arthritis. Patient has fixed clinical guidelines as per the ACR criteria. Rheumatoid factor, anti-CCP are done for the diagnosis of the condition. But do rheumatoid factor and anti-CCP have a role in monitoring? No. I have very specifically told this because it's a very common question asked by some of the clinicians. I have done a rheumatoid factor earlier, it was positive, now I'll do it again if it will become negative. When I'm treating the patient with rheumatoid arthritis, should the rheumatoid factor not come down? So that is the reason I have just put up this, that rheumatoid factor and anti-CCP, though useful in diagnosis, though useful in predicting that the patient might have an erosive disorder, may have much more radiographic changes and it could have an aggressive course, this seropositive. still it is, though useful in prognosticating, it is not as a useful marker for monitoring the disease, and the only parameters, as Dr. Vishnu had Wadding told, was ESR and CRP, which are associated with synovitis and erosions. Both of them predict the progression and, though not specific, significantly correlate with disease progression. Yes, there are times about 28%, there are some studies which say that there could be disparity within ESR and CRP itself, where the ESR could be high and CRP could be low, or the CRP could be high and the ESR could be low. But we have to take into consideration the other clinical features, the other comorbid conditions, and we also have to bear the period which the inflammation is going through, because as I said, ESR raises after a few weeks and falls down, also takes time to fall down after a few weeks, whereas CRP reacts within a few hours to days. However, on treatment, there is a decrease in these levels, and as far as adult onset Still's disease is concerned, CRP and serum ferritin, which is another acute phase reactant or the inflammatory biomarker, has been known to correlate with disease activity and remission. SLE, we just see this confusion always goes on. ESR or CRP, which inflammatory marker is better? Do I have to do both the tests for this patient? Because patient has to pay. So we did take up this study in the 2011, actually, wherein 303 patients of rheumatoid arthritis who have been diagnosed by the ACR criteria and on regular follow-up at OPD were evaluated for the tender joint count, swollen joint count, the visual analog scale, as well as the ESR and CRP. And it was noticed that when we compared them vis-a-vis, I didn't go into the whole details, that we did a mountain plot analysis for them, and you can see the clear overlap of the CRP compared to the ESR. The blue is the CRP, the red is the ESR. That CRP did fare well compared to ESR, and it is a better measure of inflammation than ESR to represent information on the inflammatory component, both when compared with tender joint count and swollen joint count, as appreciated by the overlap on the mountain plot analysis. SLE is another prototype which is very important and a very aggressive condition. It has a heterogeneous kind of a presentation because it could affect the joints, and it's a multi-system disorder. Unfortunately, currently we have very few investigations which are helpful in monitoring the disease activity. One is a simple CBC count will usually indicate an or a thrombocytopenia, and a urine microscopy, routine and microscopy, which is very commonly an ignored investigation, is very important in monitoring the cases of, so it should be done on a regular follow-up of every cases with SLE, because there will be active urinary sediments, the WBC CAS and proteinuria, which will be seen in a case of lupus nephritis. So it is an indication that the patient is probably going to have a renal disorder. ESR is the most useful. Peculiarly in SLE, CRP has no significance as far as the monitoring is concerned, except when you see a very high level of CRP, it indicates that probably the patient has serositis or some infection because of which it has raised, and it is not because of the SLE disease per se. ESR is useful, but sometimes again here we could have problems wherein that it can be raised in remission and it is normal even if there is an organ involvement. That is why a lot of composite indices have come up, like the SLE disease activity indices and the measures and so on, which take into consideration not just the clinical parameters and as well as the lab parameters. But SLE is a disease which is characterized by the presence of autoantibodies. And when you think of terms of autoantibodies, they are just not useful in diagnosis. They are even known to be predictors of the disease, and they are present much more earlier in the disease circulation. They are early signs of lupus. So all these antibodies have been tried and evaluated whether they do have a role in the monitoring of lupus. And there is only one antibody which has been found, and rather now the two I could say, because adding the antinucleosome, which have been found to correlate with the disease activity. And it is important that when a patient is of a lupus, it is good to follow up the case with dsDNA levels and antinucleosome antibodies if possible, because it is known to correlate with an increased disease activity as well as associated with lupus nephropathy. Complements are of course much more reduced because it's a procedure where there is a complement consumption, a disease where there is a mechanism is that a complement consumption is occurring. That is why the C3 and C4 levels will be low, and it could also be done by the CH50. However, it is a disease, whenever there is inflammation, you could have both complement increase in the complement synthesis as well as the complement consumption. The destruction is also happening, both of which are increased in inflammation. So it might happen that the patient has inflammation and still the C3, C4 are normal because of the compensation which occurs. That is why now a lot of biomarkers have come into the, which are being evaluated, are in research, and probably we'll soon see the light of them. Looking at the SLE pathogenesis, it is a complex disease. Once the antigen is presented by the cell to the T cells as well as the B cells, the T cells stimulate the B cells in association with the other co-stimulatory signals, which activate the B cells and release the autoantibodies. So that is why activation of a B cells becomes a very critical part of the lupus. So there, depending on the pathogenesis, the antibodies, the markers which are involved in the pathophysiological mechanisms, a few new markers have been tried. For instance, the degradation products of C3 and C4. I just mentioned that C3 and C4 are reduced and sometimes could be non-specific. That is why they were looking at degradation products of C3 and C4 to say that it is a consumptive disorder of complements. And there has also been noticed that there is high levels on flow cytometry of CD27 high plasma cells in the circulation of SLE cases. It correlated very well with dsDNA and with the duration and fall with the treatment. The cytokines like IL-6, 10, 18 and 2 receptor antibodies have also been tried. These are just a few studies which have come up, and particularly this interested me basically because here there was one company which claims that now they have a antibody which can be detected, the C4D can be detected, and there is a company which has announced that it is now available for diagnosis of lupus, which correlates very well with the disease activity. But still this has not been completely validated. See, all these, if you look at all the publications, all the work which has been done, it has all been in the last 3 to 4 years, and it might take a few more years for it to be seen. Here they are taken the reticulocyte bound C3D and C4D, because reticulocytes are the early precursors of RBCs, which have a very short half-life of about 24 to 48 hours. So when you analyze these reticulocytes binding the C3-4D, you will get the exact status of the inflammation within the last 24 to 48 hours. And that's how it has been found to be useful. Similarly, there are a few interferon signatures which have been done, like there have been a microarray assays which have been done for, this work was, pioneering work was done by Bachelor Gilsippi, and they have observed the mononuclear cells of patients with lupus and found that there are increased levels of the interferon signature molecules or the gamma interferon molecules which are present, and they feel that probably these do have a role, but however it has not been proved over a long period whether they are present. So currently a lot number of studies are going on for the pathophysiologic abnormalities and mechanisms. However, we still do not have completely validated biomarkers despite the large number of studies. But identification of such biomarkers may make it possible to objectively assess disease activity and response to therapy. So what we currently now have is just the inflammatory biomarkers, the complement levels, the dsDNA levels, and of course the clinical features which help. dsDNA also, it is not absolutely specific, that let me be very this thing, and we do find a lot of cases when we do a blot assay, we get a dsDNA negative, ELISA it will be positive, because blot assays are done at one particular concentration, and sometimes when very high levels of dsDNA are present in the circulation, you may still get a negative dsDNA on an immunoblot assay. So once an ANA positivity is there and you know that the patient is of lupus, it does help to do a dsDNA by an ELISA method, which is a quantitative assay. Ankylosing spondylitis is a condition which is very common. with seronegative spondyloarthropathy with both articular and extra-articular manifestations. As far as ankylosing spondylitis is concerned, there has been a lot of controversy on the role of ESR and CRP, but however it is said that they are moderately associated with the activity of the disease, such as signs of inflammation, range of motion, and in spite of a few discrepancy, it is still useful, and there is no single specific marker which is there for ankylosing spondylitis. But it is useful to use both of them in combination rather than to be used singly. So that is why now there are new, as far as the, I think this will be covered by the next speaker, that in ankylosing spondylitis you have, as a part of the ankylosing spondylitis disease activity score, they have now criteria which have been established for monitoring the disease, which includes the clinical features as well as the CRP and the ESR, and which is useful in actually grading the disease activity. Systemic sclerosis is another condition which is having a very vague pathogenesis. It is associated with vasculitis, endothelial damage, fibrosis, and it has two variant forms. The limited form, clinically we have two forms of systemic sclerosis, the limited form of systemic sclerosis and the diffuse form of the systemic sclerosis. Limited form is usually associated with anti-centromere antibodies, whereas the diffuse form is associated with the SCL70, which predicts a greater likelihood for the development of fibrosis, pulmonary fibrosis with abnormal liver function test. Here again, increased ESR and CRP levels at the time of diagnosis suggest that there is increased activity and an unfavorable prognosis. A lot, because there are not much parameters. However, there was one thesis which I have come across, where I saw of some student who has done an extensive work on systemic sclerosis and the biomarkers in systemic sclerosis, where they have looked at all the pathogenic mechanisms like the endothelial cell activation factors like von Willebrand factor, the angiogenic, pro-angiogenic factors like vascular endothelial growth factors, the markers of fibrosis like P1NP, cross labs, as well as P3NP. So it was noticed that in this particular study that von Willebrand, these are all endothelial factors. These are associated with increased internal organ involvement. The markers of fibrosis as well as the surfactant proteins which are synthesized by the, not synthesized, secreted by the type 2 pneumocytes. These are associated with more severe disease and interstitial lung disease. Anti-DNA topoisomerase was associated with active disease, and soluble form of CD40 ligands were associated with digital ulcers and pulmonary arterial hypertension. However, again I come to say that these are all being evaluated and they are not really available as far as, but soon I think we should be able to get this. Vasculitis is a condition which affects the blood vessels. It involves the small, medium and large vessels, so it is involving the whole it involves the whole body, and it could have a very aggressive course, and but the treatment has improved remarkably because of the immunosuppressive therapy. In spite of that, it is having a lot of relapses and remission. It is known to have it. That is the reason sometimes it becomes a challenge monitoring the vasculitis disorders. As far as the Shapley classification is concerned, there is a separate condition called as small vesicle vasculitis, which is known also as ANCA-associated vasculitis. So coming to the common parameters which are done usually in any in vasculitis will be, you will have that there may be a leukocytosis, thrombocytosis and elevated ESR with anemia, and patient could have increased urea creatinine if there is renal involvement. CRP and ESR are again useful, but again here, other than SLE, in vasculitis also, it is very, very useful to do a routine urine examination, because here you will find RBCs in the urine. There could be associated cast, granular and cell cast, and proteinuria in addition to this. Biopsy is definitely very useful for the diagnosis, but it is not always feasible to do a biopsy, because biopsy will definitely give you to know where it is involved. Sometimes it's not possible to reach the biopsy site also. So, but there are, it's again a different topic completely, where you could take up different biopsies like vasculitis in a renal tissue or vasculitis in cutaneous vasculitis. So that it does help, but it has its limitations, both biopsy as well as radiological investigations. So that is why ANCA, as I said, is a kind of a vasculitis which is known as ANCA-associated vasculitis or the small vessel vasculitis, which encompasses three conditions: the vaginous granulomatosis, microscopic polyangiitis, and Churg-Strauss. Usually, whenever an ANCA is asked, it is first asked by an immunofluorescence assay, wherein we try to say, based on the pattern, whenever a sample or a serum of a patient with vasculitis is incubated with the granulocytes, then at that time they do go and bind those antigens which are present in the WBCs, and you get a pattern which is either depending on whether the fluorescence is in the cytoplasm or around the perinuclear region, you get a pattern which is called as a C cytoplasmic antineutrophil cytoplasmic antibody or perinuclear pattern. So you have a C ANCA and a P ANCA pattern. The C ANCA pattern is the one which is usually associated with the vaginous granulomatosis, seen to be about 60 to 80% of cases with vaginous, and the P ANCA pattern is usually associated with the microscopic polyangiitis. Churg-Strauss could have both C ANCA as well as a P ANCA pattern. So that is why it is sometimes ANCA is one particular antibody which could be useful in the monitoring the cases of vasculitis, particularly the PR3 ANCA, that is the proteinase 3 ANCA which is present, which could have a role in monitoring the disease. So once an ANCA is positive by an IF, you could either confirm it which type of an ANCA by a blot, or rather better to do an ELISA for the ANCA, for particularly for the PR3 and MPO ANCA, because the titers do help to some extent in monitoring the activity of disease. Here again it is shrouded with lot of controversies. However, in spite of that, it definitely helps in a patient of vasculitis to know that how to titrate it along with the ANCA. If not completely absolute, it should be, whenever an ANCA, raised ANCA is there, the patient should be reviewed for the clinical features of active disease. There has been a reasonable correlation, as I said. The problem with ANCA is ANCA has a long half-life or the shelf life, because of which even if the treatment patient does well, the fall lags behind. That is why you will find that the patient is already gone into remission, but still the ANCA levels are high. However, a rise in ANCA may predict a relapse. ESR and CRP are again useful in vasculitis, but particularly in those cases where the ANCA is. And CRP, however, here correlates much more better with the disease activity than ESR. There are again a new set of biomarkers which have been tried for vasculitis, particularly the subset of P and T cells, in which patients with activated CD19, CD38 positive cells were higher in patients with vasculitis. The complement degradation products by the alternate pathway over here, like C5a and BB, are seen. Cytokines such as IL-16 and IL-17, these have also been evaluated. Particularly in a case of a giant cell arthritis, it has been found that an inflammatory marker like interleukin-16 correlates very well with disease activity and titers. Idiopathic inflammatory myositis, I'll just touch upon that. What we currently now use is, there are three types. The one is the polymyositis, juvenile dermatomyositis, and inclusion body myositis. Currently what we use is just the enzymes like SGOT, SGPT, CKMB particularly is very commonly used. Not CKMB, it is CKNAC, because CKMB is more specific for cardiac marker. So, the creatinine kinase are used for for monitoring the response to therapy, but however they are very insensitive markers, and they only indicate the mesial disease activity, and they do not indicate whether the patient has other extraarticular manifestations like interstitial lung diseases, which are very commonly associated with the myositis or the myopathy group. So anti-Jo1 antibody, there are a whole lot of antibodies which are present in myositis. We do a myositis profile for these patients. Whenever a patient is suspected of having a myositis, we do a complete myositis, and ANA is positive or shows a cytoplasmic stain on the ANA slide. Then we do a myositis profile for these cases, and for a whole lot of antibodies are present, like anti-Jo1, SRP antibodies, then the PL7, 12 and so on. However, anti-Jo1 antibody is the one which has been associated with specifically with the anti-synthetase antibodies, which includes, this is a specific condition wherein they have a more aggressive course, and it is associated with fever, myositis, interstitial lung diseases, and non-erosive arthropathy. It has been found that there has been a moderate correlation with the anti-Jo1 antibody titers and the clinical indicators for myositis that include elevation of CPK, muscle function and articular involvement. This was again another interesting thing, that in inflammatory myopathies, there have been a whole lot of tests done, and particularly the type 1 interferons, which include the interferon alpha, beta, the interleukins, these what I call as the interferon signature molecules, these have have really gaining traction as disease markers in idiopathic inflammatory myositis. In addition to this, other studies have also been done to involve interleukin 17, 23, the toll-like receptors. But type 1 interferon and the myeloid cell signatures are leading candidate markers for idiopathic inflammatory myositis. There is something which really interested was that these interferon regulated chemokines, when these have been assayed, till now what was being done, that they were being done only by the genetic workup of the interferons was being done. But in one of the studies they have seen that it is raised, even ELISA was done. So there was a chemokine level also done, as well as the genetic workup done for these interferon associated antibodies, like the monokines which are induced by the interferon, the macrophage inflammatory proteins, the TNF, IL-10, IL-6 and IL-8. And each of these cytokines significantly correlated with the global and muscle disease activity measures in particular. The changes in the juvenile and the adult dermatomyositis correlated positively. And what was interesting over here is that these reflect changes disease activity over the duration of the disease, even when the treatment was taken. So this was something, and probably I was just looking and I was just discussing, if not for a complete diagnostic workup, why not we start? That's the first thought which occurred to me. So that's why when you know that it is something which would be probably very, very helpful in cases with myositis or for biomarkers. Thank you so much. I've just tried to tell what are the basics which are available now and what is going to be coming. A whole lot of antibodies are coming, a lot of workup is being done, the whole mystery is being unraveled. Let us look at what is going to be optimal for clinical use. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dr. Renuka. The topic is open for discussion. Any questions, please? So,
Yes, sir. Clinical role of Dapsone. I think the clinicians, rheumatologists, all of them are sitting here. They would probably guide you better than me as far as. No, maybe you could just answer his query, but. Role of Dapsone.
what kind of vasculitis are you talking about, sir? What type of vasculitis? Sorry? It may have some role in patients who have just cutaneous vasculitis who do not respond to routine measures, but the role is not very, it's not a very well-known form of treatment.
Thank you, sir.
But there are a lot of well-established therapeutic protocols which are
Correct.
there for vasculitis, so which have been defined. Yes. Yes, yes, we do find a lot of it actually.
What do you suggest as a marker to confirm where it belongs?
No, there are antibodies which are available for chikungunya, and both ELISA assays are also
See,
available.
That is, in some patients don't get positive, some patients get very late. Early stages you don't get positive. So
You-
what are the markers in such cases to differentiate it?
See, first of infection,
Yeah.
no?
Any specific?
And
Any specific, anything else?
the chikungunya test is the only thing, because see, when it comes to infections, it is only the infective marker which is going to really help, because these are like chronic disorders and connective tissue. But when it comes to the infections, the inciting agent, the assay for that would be the best one for a confirmed diagnosis for a condition like dengue or chikungunya. For dengue, of course, now we have an earlier marker, NS1, probably some more work. I need to really look up what can be found out for chikungunya in this earlier thing.
Thanks, Dr. Renuka.
Thank you.